The road to FranCamp. So Nick, I've been looking forward to this. It's our recap video from the Chicago Mastermind FranCamp event. In between, I've had some really good phone calls with clients, but for today, we're going to talk about is selling more franchises by amplifying your brand story. I want to connect the dots too with the FranCamp event we had this past month in Chicago, and really get some insights. And we could share the presentation from the FranCamp event for everyone listening, watching this video. What I want you to take out of it is some actionable tools, some check marks on where you're at with your brand. Can you be enhancing the brand story to sell more? And maybe some of the insights we learned at FranCamp, maybe where we missed the mark, Nick, where maybe there was some confusion and some winning moments. So I think it'd be some great time together going over this.
Why don't we start with the last part and work backwards? So what were some of the misses? Because if someone's watching this, part of what we're trying to give them is the tools to either strip away things that we talked about at FranCamp or consider coming to the next one. And so I'm going to start with the big one. And I still get this question is, what is FranCamp? And so, Charles, I'll let you take the first swing at it, because I think when you think about a franchise conference or a summit, you have preconceived notions that are associated with this. This is much different. How would you explain what FranCamp even is?
Right. Well, it's exploring, right? It's a journey together with other franchisors. So it's combination networking, mastermind, but different from all the other conferences. And maybe we made some mistakes here too, it's a working boot camp. So this is not a conference where you come in and hear 1,000 ideas. There's actionable tasks that FranCamp is built around, 4 FranCamp conference / boot camps a year. And we're building them on core fundamentals that franchisors need to grow their brand. And the idea, just like camp, we're going to build up our skills. We're going to keep getting better. We're building community. So to me, it's a working boot camp and elite mastermind.
Yeah, I think for setting expectations, and we've heard this from some of the folks that came, to like, FranCamp was phenomenal. You can see the videos on the website of people talking about what they got out of it. But the two things were like, I didn't even know what to expect. Like, how do I prepare for FranCamp? I didn't even know what I was coming into. And then secondly, I wasn't prepared for how exhausted I would be after the first full day. And that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted people to feel exhausted, because far too often, and you and I have gone to plenty of conferences, we go there and there's a panel and there's a PowerPoint, and maybe on our little notepad, we write down an idea that we're going to try to implement. But then we have to take an idea from a piece of paper onto an airplane, back home, catch up from work, and now think back through how can we implement that piece. And so here, it's hard to see. Both of us have these workbooks, but it is a thick, this is 50 plus page workbook. And so this leads into the second thing, and this is an adjustment that we made, especially as we transition into Miami, is each mastermind boot camp has a workbook that's associated with it. If you are watching this video and you want to see a preview of Miami, there's another video that will be filmed or is filmed that you can watch, find on YouTube. But when we went through this workbook, the reality is we could have taken just one part of the workbook and it was enough to transform the businesses. And so if we reflect backwards on what was the good that came out of this, is all of these brands, we have unit size of 1,000 and we have unit size of 1. All of these brands started looking in the mirror and saying, wait a second, I'm trying to amplify my brand story to sell more franchises, but I'm not. On my website, I'm not. In my call one with a candidate, I'm not. To franchise brokers, I'm not. And so we have all these brands that as they started reflecting, they're like, I want to sell franchises. I don't know how to sell franchises. And the big discovery ends up being the way you sell franchises within the DNA of the business that you've already created. even before you turn into a franchise, like the DNA of your idea and the grit and hustle and bruises and blood that you had to build up as a business owner to get to that level. Or if you're head of franchise development, which we had those at FranCamp too, the backstory of how the brand got to the point of even being able to hire a professional to help lead their sales. Like there is so much to uncover there. And when you really strip away what is the reason someone buys, it starts with this deep connection that if I'm going to buy Charles's burgers, my belief in Charles is going to build wealth for my family, or I'm going to be able to build wealth for my family through Charles's model has to exist. And if it doesn't, then all these brands fail. So setting expectations of what FranCamp is, it's an exhaustive 3-day session where you will walk away with lifetime connections in franchising. And you'll also walk away with a workbook that has action, but you're also in your 10 to 12 to 15 person group. You are going to problem solve, issue process the gaps that exist in your business. That's part of what you get out of this. And it's hard to explain because there's nothing like it.
Well, what was really good is that I think you need to see everything and get overwhelmed and try and fail, or try hard and feel like you haven't hit the mark, which is, we all dove deep at FranCamp, and we could share some of the presentation, but I'd like to share some insights. So we were EPing camp groups as we worked through our brand story, our challenges, our why us and why now. And what was very interesting, rather than sitting back at a passive conference where you're listening and you're saying, yeah, that's a good idea, I'm going to do that, it became, that's a good idea, and I need to do that now and articulate that in front of my other camp members. And it became difficult. And even the most basic questions for all of us, even for myself, having worked on this and prepared this with you, Nick, was, what makes your business unique? What makes your franchise unique? Now it's one thing, at an industry level to have the generics, training, support, unit economics. But then when you get to the deeper level, and there was very touching moments in a group, I met with one franchisor who wasn't a client. She was amazing. And when you looked at her website, it was all the industry general things of, join X industry, be in business, not by yourself, generic items. And legitimately 2 days ago, I had a call with her and she said, Charles, I've changed everything. And I've been inspired. And I was shocked because we looked at her website and it was like, she dove into the story. I mean, she was telling a touching story about her husband, how he started the business. I mean, people were tearing up in some of these groups when you're talking about story, and that's where the magic's at. And I think, so the combination of structured program, one set goal of each brand camp, which in this case was, bringing out that brand story, and then that mastermind together in that setting, I thought was very effective. And what I'd like to do now, Nick, is go through, just because this is a short video, it's not going to be long, but the people that are listening, a very super light version of what they would have experienced at FranCamp. And whether you never come, I want this maybe to inspire as they dive deeper into what they're doing with the franchise development strategy itself.
One more thing before you go into that, Charles, I think is important. The other thing that's different about FranCamp, and this was very important to me personally, is as a supplier to franchisors, I've gone to so many conferences, and my participation is limited to sitting in an audience and working a booth. That's it. That's my participation. And so here in your group, in my group, and even in Counselor Leads, when you take off the title supplier and you put on the title expert or thought leader, and you participate. I was participating as a part of our business and saying, how do we transform the way that we're telling our story? And this ignited me to make some adjustments in my business. And part of it was listening to those around me saying, like, how do we break into this next cycle? And allowing them to also feed my business. And what that does is it creates a vulnerable moment to say, like, I know, you're at a conference and they're like, hey, Charles, how's your business doing? It's like, oh, we're on fire. Well, this allows you to say, we're doing well, but here's the gaps that we have. How can we fix them?
Well, and it was great seeing those suppliers interact at that entrepreneurial level, at that vulnerable level with their potential clients, right?
Yeah.
So, in my group, and we had actually, one of the sponsors, opened up about the lack of clarity in their business and got amazing insights. And then, we know post-conference, he actually got in a car and drove, I don't know how many hours to see one of those franchisors. So it was
8 hours.
the connection. 8 hours, was it?
8 hours. Yeah, I said 8 hours.
So good stuff. The formula is there, and it's the process and the community. And so for everyone out there itself, right? So the goal for your brand is amplifying that brand story, crowded marketplace. We were talking about Bigfoot and if Bigfoot were a franchise brand, and I won't go through that. But it's about story and what brought you to, what transformed your business and how did you get there?
Go stay on the Bigfoot thing for 1 second.
Sure.
Because the magic of the Bigfoot story, real or not, is like the magic of the brand story happens when others start telling the story of your business. And that could start with your customers saying how awesome the experience was. And the beauty of the Bigfoot story is the amount of human beings that you say Bigfoot, the brand awareness is tremendous. And the version of the story, if you said, even to a kid today, explain to me what is Bigfoot, they're like, oh, this crazy guy that lives in the woods that scares people, whatever it is. But it's created this extension, and part of building the drumbeat for your brand is to establish your Bigfoot story. Like, what is the story that people want to share and say, did you hear the story of X? And I mean, you could look at, in recent movie time, you look at the movie The Founder. Well, if you ask someone to talk about the founding of McDonald's, because the story has continued to climb, it can point back to, it was two brothers that operationalized consistency around burgers, fries, and shakes. And so you can think back to the foundational moment. That's their Bigfoot that continued to expand, and then add on like the owner operator. The magic of the Bigfoot story is not just identifying the story, it's the giving the ability to other people to tell that story for you.
It's a good point, Nick. And one takeaway that came about from this when we're in group sessions was, if you look at the story of Bigfoot, right? It started with like a big footprint, right? And, for franchise brands, the opportunity is the overlooked little things, the little breadcrumbs you're going to leave behind, the little stories, the information, the videos that all revolve around the brand. But those little footprints or big footprints are what people are going to be looking at in the background when they're evaluating investment decisions and buying a franchise. And so I'm glad you brought that back front and center, because it's all about, Bigfoot may not exist, but there's these stories. Your brand does exist. And right now, one challenge for all businesses and brands is that you're not leaving behind those footprints, meaningful footprints, for people to start understanding the story and making the connection. And that was not something I expected going in, but like it became clear as we were speaking with brands. And I can't tell you the stories of, like, a hardship with someone's mom that led to him founding the business, or a husband that was not achieving life goals and did something else that built a business, and amazing stories about one amazing business, but the founder had such an amazing career in sales, hit rock bottom, and built up something beautiful. And all of these stories were nowhere to be found, right? It's like they're bottled up inside of these entrepreneurs, team members. And certainly that I thought was effective as we helped unlock that during FranCamp. And for anyone listening out there, right, it gets back to, right, the purpose of your brand, opportunity and transformation, right? The transformation you offer franchisees. But as you're exploring all this, one big lesson from FranCamp was you're probably under indexing and undertelling your personal story, your own transformation. And it seemed like there was a ton of opportunity there.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's go through. I mean, basics, Nick. I don't want anyone to be bored here, right? But brands are missing out on their opportunity, right? Messaging is lost, maybe having a difficult time gaining momentum. And look, there's opportunity out there, but we see it. Some brands are thriving and some brands are just struggling to gain that oxygen in the room. And so one of the FranCamp foundational items, again, 4 conferences a year, one core is brand story, and there's different elevations of it. And at this FranCamp, we focused on the story and the transformation, brand story, uniques, founder transformation. And as we went through the workbooks and the process, it started with founder motivation, right? And those founder stories.
Well, even take Wendy's, right? Far beyond Dave Thomas is gone.
Right.
It still is part of the DNA. And so you take the founding of Wendy's, or you can think back to the commercials. People can still connect to that. Now, Wendy's is obviously an well-established brand that has gone well beyond the founder story into tremendous consistency of operations. Like at some point you get beyond it. But I would say especially for the first 500 locations, like it ends up being the DNA, because the beauty of franchising is it gives an operational model to a small business owner. And so smaller brands under 500 units operate through people that tend to live in the community to some degree of where they own their locations. And so when you think through it, it has to be part of the DNA, even if the founder is sold the business. Like I think through brothers that just do gutters, ultimately they sold their business, but their DNA is still a part of the founder story. And when they're selling franchises, I would assume, I haven't gone through their sales process, but I would assume that founding story, the hustle, the grit, the consistency, the treating franchisees right, the true support, ends up still being a part of the DNA. So even after you exit, it's still there.
Yeah, and sometimes I overlook that story also needs to connect with the unit economics. And if you're getting the story right and genuine, franchisees will also see another side to it, which is operational efficiency and focus on unit economics, which also becomes critical, right, throughout the entire process. So it's not just about marketing; it's living that. And one of the challenges when we were sitting in a group, when you throw out there, what's the purpose of your brand and the reason you exist, and we had a workshop to facilitate all this. It's a pretty deep question. Right.
And then, well, and I think what's interesting, and this is where it's not cookie cutter, like the conversations that are happening in your group versus mine end up being vastly different and take a life of their own, because someone says something that triggers someone else to start talking about it. So at our table, we had more of the strong emerging brand, like a Verlo mattress, and we had a micro brand that is one unit and going through the franchise process. And I'm watching both take notes, because I said in our session, I said, hey, Bobby, who is with Verlo, I said, if you had to sell just one of that guy's franchises, what would you do? And it changed the discussion, because now you have to tap into things that aren't just capital. When you're talking about what's the purpose of your brand, the reason you exist, you have to tap into emotion, and you have to think through, how can I leverage emotion to ignite someone to say, boy, I want to be a part of this. Let me invest my life savings into it. And so the transformation of discussion was so unique to each group, and it wasn't everybody is, swimming in the same direction, because you can't. That's the beauty of a mastermind.
Yeah. And this is not just a check the box question either, because what I found is the brands that were gaining traction that came to FranCamp, their purpose was infiltrating everything they were doing. Core values, website, how they interacted with brokers, level of support they were adding to franchisee partners, how they were celebrating new franchisees, and uncovering those stories. Once you are clear and help uncover that purpose, which is there for all these brands, there's something that motivated each of these founders to create a great business or a good business. It unlocks so much else, which, as opposed to just getting stuck in a system, hire a marketing agency, go to a broker group, all things that are important, but it's very formula, it's just a formula. Whereas I saw brands that are thriving, husband and wife, really leaning in on what it did for their lives, and then making sure the marketing doesn't turn into marketing. It turns into, this is what we're going to do to help franchise buyers succeed like us, which became operational, technology. There was a lot there. And so anyone listening to this, as you go through this is a deeper question. And as you consider that purpose, evaluate where you're telling this or how you're communicating this on your website. But again, if the purpose is genuine, what's the unique advantage you're offering franchisees? Which, if you have a hard time answering this, I think we all do at a superficial level. The answer's there, but it's deeper. And it's not in platitudes or industry terms. It's on the how you're going to get this done. It's also about, what your promise is to franchisees, what they should expect, and how you help them get there. That's where your advantages, I think, will come from.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you're watching this and you're dialed into what we're talking about, these are the questions you need to be asking yourself, because really, the reason you get to asking yourself this is if you're not selling like crazy. There are brands that sell like crazy, and maybe that's because they really perfected their message to the broker networks, and the broker networks are doing it for them. And even those, I think, taking a step backwards, you might feel really good, but your transformation isn't just selling franchises, it's making those franchisees actually be successful. And some of these things that you have to pull out, or that you do pull out, can have tremendous impact on your unit level economics later on too.
Yeah, I love that perspective, Nick, right? Because you're right. So someone may perfect their messaging and positioning with broker groups, but if you're genuine about these advantages, you're going to say, hey, I got to stop selling or slow it down, because I need to support this and make sure they're replicating their success.
Yeah.
Which gets to franchisee transformation, right? Which, Nick, that's not easy for emerging brands. I mean, startups, it's difficult. What do you recommend clients do when they're focused on this? Or how does transformation live on a website, in franchise sales materials? And then, more important, you're on, boards at franchise companies. How should it be impacting culture?
So I'm smiling because there's a very simple question that I think you ask yourself when you get to this one. And this ultimately is your decision as a business. When you transform lives, you commit to growing a franchise that could have a tremendous exit for you, in my opinion. So I smile because the question is this: if you think back to when you're single, if you are single, are you interested in dating? Or are you interested in getting married? And so far too often, the emerging brand focuses is on dating. They go, I want to date as much as humanly possible. Dating is finding franchisees and selling them a franchise. Marrying, getting prepared for marriage and commitment, that's different. And you might say, no, I'm not going to kiss that frog. And the ability to say no and protect, like, how do you build these layers up of your first franchisee and your second one? And it being so critical. So like, if you're just dating, you sell in a shotgun approach, meaning you're Chicago based, you sell in Dallas, you sell in Florida, you sell in California, you don't care where they sell. Now, the reality is, if you're Chicago based, logistically, you can't get in a car and drive and have dinner with your franchisee and sit with their unit and go and walk a neighborhood and hand out signs. Like, you don't have the ability to do that because of where you live and work is not connected to that franchisee. And so if I look at the best emerging brands, and yes, there are some that can get lucky because and I say lucky, they've really perfected the operational side of the business. So it is a business in a box, and the branding ends up being irrelevant. It's more so the structure around customer experience. But for majority of brands that really take off, it's because they marry their franchisees, they qualify them for long term, and they put them as close to a concentric circle as possible, so that when they're evaluating how can I transform a franchisee's life, it's not just in the operational box that I gave them, which you should say, absolutely, this would transform someone's life if they bought into it. But then it comes to intangibles of relationship building with your franchisees, giving them additional training, and not treating everybody the same. If a franchisee is struggling, you might give them more scaffolding, and really having a true North Star on what the deal value is, knowing that if your franchisee makes more money on gross sales, you make more money. That's where you start transforming lives. So it's a very complex statement to say. Question one is, are you dating? Are you looking to get married? Question two is, when you look yourself in the mirror and say, does my business transform franchisees' lives or have the potential to? If there's any hesitation, then you need to go back to the starting line and re-engineer your approach, because it's going to be very hard to accomplish other things in this workbook, which is, how do I sell more franchises?
Well, and from a deal value perspective, which is something we're going to be discussing in FranCamp Miami coming up in December, and connecting with the transformation. It's not a coincidence. This past month, two of our clients did very large exits and acquisitions, one in retail, one in restaurant. And it's not a coincidence that both of those brands have a very strong number of multi-unit franchisee operators. Right. And so that transformation is happening, and it's led to multi-unit ownership. And to your point, it's better to have one franchisee that you would marry that owns 4 locations than 4 franchisees you're dating that would have separate locations. So that transformation is very powerful when we talk about exit strategies, and not to overwhelm this video, right? But we also, in FranCamp, it was operational, right, too. The end result was, one of the goals at the end was, what does your website look like, right? And some of the checklist items were, what is the transformational headline on your website? What information you're providing about mission and core values? Do you explain how you help franchisees succeed? Do you have that founder video talking about transformation, clear uniques, and communicating what happens after you sign a franchise agreement? So again, the point being is, the goal is a working boot camp. We want to answer these, and we're going to have a meetup afterwards for everyone who came to this Chicago FranCamp event. But the idea is to start these questions now, grapple with them, and work on that evolution as your brand continues to evolve.
Yeah, I mean, read these screens. I mean, in essence, like, the disadvantage for you doing this on video is you're going to do it solo, and the advantage of FranCamp is you're doing it with peers. human peers, not business peers necessarily, but human peers. But look at the questions that have gone up here on the 3 focus groups. Read through these, and just even if you just take that last one, can my business transform franchisees' lives? If the answer is no, then I would encourage you to backcast and say, what could I have done differently to improve the business up to this point, and what am I going to do moving forward to improve the business to the point? Some of those things will help guide you towards how you're really going to develop your brand story. Because like the brand story and the Bigfoot story took a life of its own. You lay these little footprints out there. You've awarded a franchise. Your franchisee is opened. They've hit a milestone. Your business has hit a milestone. Your business has sold some franchises. Your franchisees are hitting successful metrics. You have a point of differentiation on the consumer side. Like, you start looking through this drumbeat, and the drumbeat in today's world can be traditional PR. It can be your LinkedIn. It's absolutely your website. If you land on your website and you look at these and say, am I telling a franchise buyer how I can transform their life? No? Well, change it. Like, some of these things are in your control. And if you do some of these changes, it will have tremendous impact on your business.
Yeah. And Nick, as we wrap up here, coming up next in terms of FranCamp, let me just see here if I could. So we have FranCamp Miami coming this December. And focus is what for the next camp?
Miami is all about budgeting. So now that you've started thinking about transforming your story, and you've pulled this magical cloud out of the sky of how many units you want to sell, how are you actually going to do it? What does a budget look like? What does deal value look like? Some of those things are going to have to be a part of that.
And I think what I'm looking forward to that process is, I was looking through the workbooks, and as we're planning, is really getting an understanding, which is something you're very focused on, which is, as a franchisor, understanding the value of each deal and getting that deal valuation mindset, not only in the initial franchise fee and first year of operation, but what does this look like over time? What does the valuation look like? What would private equity look like? So I think that's going to be a good foundation as we work on deal valuation and then budgeting, because I think one of the biggest items all of us have as entrepreneurs is sometimes we focus on marketing tactics or sales strategies, but we don't have a clear budget in mind, and then it leads to lack of discipline and ineffective marketing.
Well, and it cross applies over to the franchise supplier too, which I think that's the important part. Like, I'll put our business in perspective. These are not real numbers. This is to put it in perspective. Let's say our average client retainer is $5,000 a month, and our average client stays with us for 2 years. So that'd be $5,000 a month times 24 months ends up being $120,000 is our deal value. Okay. Now, when I say, okay, how many clients do we want to grow next year, whether that's a financial target or it's a number of clients, let's just say I want 12 new logos in the next year, and I need actually 6 additional to cover attrition. So I actually need 18 logos. Well, let's take the 12. The 12 is going to be worth north of $1 million. And so now we work through the question of, okay, I have a check. It says $1 million. How much am I willing to pay for that? And so I take off let's just say half for operating costs. So now our profitability on those 12 logos is $500,000. How much would I be willing to spend? And I might say half of that. So now I have $250,000 I'm willing to spend to get the other $250,000, double up my return in exchange for gross income of north of $1 million. Well, now when I take $250,000, now we can start building out the formula for how are we going to spend that to maximize our potential of getting 12 clients out of that $250,000. These are the exercises that don't happen. It's more like, here, CEO X says you get $100,000 budget for the next year. Great. That might only mean 4 franchisees, which means I'm going to miss my sales goal, which means I'm going to be disappointed, which means you're going to be disappointed, which means at the end of 2025, we're going to have a come to Jesus on how I failed. But it all started with a fake number pulled out of the clouds, not proper budgeting put against it, false expectations, and a pathway to success that didn't exist. And so us going through that formula, we're doing it in both the mastermind and as a group, is going to be essential to giving the playbook for how Brand X can win at budgeting for 2025. And that's Miami.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And then if anyone, I mean, you could go to 1851francamp.com, go to the website. You'll see all the conferences coming up. Next is Miami, then there's Dallas, and then New York, New Jersey. So it's going to be a lot of fun. The point of it all is it's not just one conference and we're done and maybe we implement or not. We're going to hit the 4 core fundamentals of what it's going to take to grow a franchise brand. And then we're going to keep building on it, both in community and some hard work, and create some very differentiated brands.
I mean, I'm looking at the first 10 brands that registered for Miami. 8 of them came to Chicago. And this is where we take that. We're building upon it, and then we're going to continue to rinse and repeat throughout next year. So when we get all the way back to Chicago 2025, we're going to rework that brand story, look back in the mirror and say, how do we tweak this to make it stronger? And that's going to be the magic of this. It's going to put people in with peer groups that will have some rotation of ideas, and then sustainability beyond it. Because I know, the example that Charles gave, we had a supplier that came, sat in Charles's group, connected with a brand in the group, drove 8 hours to go see them, broke bread, gave them consultancy, that now that lifelong relationship is established. That's what comes out of FranCamp too.
Yeah, and some cool gear with the FranCamp apparel there. Yeah, so all right, so this is just a primer for building that brand story. Guys, go back, really answer those questions and challenge it, and check out FranCamp, and there'll be more. You know, we got to have like a cool, like the road to FranCamp type stuff. I don't know. I think this is only the first video, so forgive us if it's not really that, but these are going to be amazing videos.
Amazing videos.
Amazing.
FranCamp. See you later.